G'day, legends. I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and especially because it's a Monday, a fantastic start to the week. Now, I had the weekend off as I had to travel then interstate, but over that time, we had the 2nd year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, and it feels a bit weird. I was there for a few weeks before the 24th of February 2022, and then I was there through the invasion, and I was live streaming as some of the very first missiles came into Ukraine. So it's been a bit of a weird feeling seeing that evolve and seeing also my knowledge of this war and where I feel about certain things and how I see it changing over the amount of time as well. But today, legends, we have a fair bit to go over. So we're going to look at Abrams tanks, the Poles with the grain, with Ukrainian grain, and they're not happy, an American fighting for Russia. Of course, we'll have a look at the maps that'll be in the beginning, a Russian plane being taken down, which is incredibly important, Crimea, and of course, a press conference in Ukraine that was held yesterday, so about 15 or 16 hours ago. But there's some very, very interesting bits and pieces coming out of this, and I think is fueling the informational space more than ever. And if you just type in Ukraine on an incognito window on a VPN, whatever, all the first stories will be about this. So it's basically about Zelensky's claims about the casualties, the losses in Ukraine. And this is significantly lower than a lot of people will say that it is. So that he's saying around 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. Each person is a very big loss. 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers died in this war. It's very painful for us. And this is in this then translated video here.
Це брехня, по-перше. Все це абсолютно маячня. Кожна людина – це великі втрати для нас. І це дуже великі втрати для нас. 31 тисяча українців загинуло, військових загинуло в цій війні. Ні 300 тисяч, ні 150 тисяч, що там бреше Путін за своїм брехливим колом. Але тим не менш, кожна ця втрата – це великі втрати для нас. Росіяни загинуло їх 180.
And then saying that 180,000 Russians have been killed. Now, some of this is interesting, and personally, I don't even think the most hardcore supporters aren't questioning this number. There's everyone, I think, is questioning this and going, yeah, no, it doesn't really seem correctly. Especially when we've been told the entire war that Russia has superior artillery and air power. Now, Russia has been on the offensive for the majority of the war, so yes, likely their losses will be much higher. But even if we take into this number that Zelensky has said, that 10-to-1 figure that gets thrown around, well, that's not fitting there either. But Zelensky says that 180,000 Russians have been killed. Well, his government released this just, say, on the 24th, and it's higher again today, that they're saying that now 410,000 Russians have been killed. So more than double there. And then Rybar, this is what Rybar will say around the Ukrainian losses, that it's now over 500,000. And this is why I say, don't believe figures. I'm sorry, I don't care whose mouth it comes out of, even if it's mine. Don't believe it until we're 50 years on and we get an estimation of it. And then, look, like even in Avdiivka, that Ukraine has said that in Avdiivka, that 47,100 Russian soldiers died just there. So, look, I think the biggest hit that could really happen with this is if and when the real numbers are released and it suddenly jumps from, 2 years into war at 30,000 and then jumps into maybe a high 5 figures or low 6 figures or wherever it is, then the backfire will be massive. And of course, if it's doing this and then does that, that doesn't help the informational space on either side, well, particularly your own. And of course, then it has a huge impact on morale. And like with this 31,000 number, we know that 28,000 Ukrainians are in Russian captivity. And even, look, if we put in rough numbers that say 120,000 then are been wounded, well, this doesn't really fit within the calls for another 500,000 men to be mobilized in Ukraine. Now, that number, that 28,000 of Ukrainians in captivity, that actually came out at this same press conference from Ukraine's ombudsman, Dmytro Labanets, as well. So we're going to go through some more interesting bits that were then said in this. Now, of course, these are the direct quotes outside then of what he has said, but here we see as well, and we've talked about this, Medusa and Media Zone, what they forget out of this, and because I think this is because it's from Kyiv Independent, this was also done with BBC, that 83,000 Russians have been killed. They're going through Facebook posts, newspapers, obituaries, all this sort of stuff, and that's where they're compiling how many they're doing there, although they have said that it will be, it could be significantly higher, and we would imagine that. Some people just won't post on social media about their son being killed, but we get some idea of the reference of where the numbers could be. So somewhere between 30,000 and wherever the other side will say. But like I'm saying, losses like this take with a grain of salt, and I think Zelensky putting a number on it, I think was a really, really bad move. Now, he does say as well here that he won't say the wounded because they don't want to know how many soldiers are left on the battlefield. But we know Zaluzny, Zelensky, they've all talked about that there is a need for more men and more mobilization on the front line. Now, here, Zelensky in the same conference, so this is a different question and answer from that, but the same press conference, has also warned that Russia will be preparing for counteroffensive actions at the beginning of the summer or end of May if they can, that they will be then preparing for the battle. Now, if you've watched the Defense Politics Asia podcast I did, and it's interesting because we all come from very, very different angles. I'm on the pro-Ukraine bias side, and I admit I have biases there as well, but I'm willing to look past them, I believe, for factual reporting. We talk about, will Ukraine go on the offensive this year? And many people think no. And Zelensky's saying here that he is basically saying that Russia is going to go on the offensive summer and May. Russia has been on the offensive since, well, you could say November. So they've already spent, say, 3-4 months on the offensive, that Ukraine is preparing for a battle of another 3 or 4 months of Russia on the offensive. And what you're going to see very soon on the map is you're going to see that Russia is having a lot of success on the front line. People say it's insignificant, but role reverse, people will be having a wet dream. You need to still be realistic. Zelensky added that March and April would be difficult months for Ukraine due to the instability in the US that may affect other countries. Of course, that money is still being held up in the House. It's meant to be end of Feb, but we have really no idea. Now, in this as well, we're going to talk more about air defense a little bit later in the video, but said that having 10 more American-made Patriot missile systems, these retail for just over $1 billion per system, for key industrial centers, so protecting that and deploying them close to the front line would have fundamentally changed the situation. They wouldn't have approached us. They would have retreated. We would have broken their defense lines and moved forward. We have seen Ukraine is putting these Patriots closer and closer to the front line, therefore putting them in more risk, but having more success against Russian aircraft as well. That said, with Russian aircraft, with aircraft going down, we need evidence or both sides to admit it first. I'm sorry, we need beyond reasonable doubt. So why does Ukraine not have it, he asks? Well, it means that not everyone needs it, or that not everything is possible, or that everything is ahead of us. So, putting in that they want more of these Patriot missile systems. Sorry, that is the same one. Now, press conference, we got a hell of a lot out of this. This hasn't been spoken about as much as it bloody should have been, but basically the quote pulled out is the bit that I have highlighted, but we'll speak through the whole thing. I can't tell you the details of the plan, asking about further offensive. The fewer people are aware of the plans of the Ukrainian army, the sooner the victory and unexpected outcome for the Russians will be achieved. I must confess that the plans for our counter-offensive actions last autumn were on the table in the Kremlin before those counter-offensive actions had even started. Full stop. So there are some snakes in the grass in Kyiv, 100%. And we've seen big shuffling around of leadership there too. But this is unbelievably disappointing, that if you were a soldier and that information got leaked from some prick sipping bloody cocktails and eaten cucumber sandwiches has been leaked, and you and your mates have been killed or injured because of that leak. It's just bloody unbelievable that could happen. But we also know that it wasn't a very tight ship on those counteroffensive actions either. There was trailers being released. There was open information, people talking about it too, but there was a trailer released. We knew it was coming, and you look at the map and you go, it's probably going to be here. And yeah, but that is a leaky ship doesn't do well. Loose lips sink ships, and I think that has come to fruition there, that admit of how that's happened within his government too. And I'm sorry, but the leader needs to still take responsibility for that. If it's your government, it doesn't matter that there's a leak at the bottom. You are still responsible for keeping this all together. Now, we are going to have a look at the maps, and we do have a fair bit to go over in this section. So, of course, this is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, so just over 2 years now. And the purple, now 10 years since the annexation of Crimea. Now, of course, the Dnipro River running through here. We haven't seen any changes on the west down here. We saw a tiny change, but it's not backed up by any of the maps near Lobkovy here the other day, just where the front line may sit. But where we need to go is we need to go right here into Avdiivka, as there has been significant change here. Now, when we saw Ukraine withdraw from Avdiivka or pushed out of Avdiivka, whatever language you want to use that makes you feel better about yourself, but we did see them move back out of Avdiivka. And what we were saying was, how prepared are the positions that they've now fallen into? And we're getting more and more reports today that Ukrainian elements are moving west, and the Russians are saying it's because these areas are not fortified. And what the information we got when Ukraine announced that they're withdrawing from Avdiivka was they're withdrawing to more favourable positions. We questioned this because we said, well, a lot of these positions have held for 10 years. They've been holding for 2 years of full-scale war. These are pretty favourable positions that you've dug in, you've reinforced, they're bunkered. What has actually been built in around here? How much is there? And if you listen to my podcast with some foreign fighters, they have been saying 18 months ago, we are behind already on building defences. And let's look how this has rolled from the 22nd is probably when I spoke to you last, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and then 26th. So we see just over a few days, we see how much more positions here that Russia has taken up to Lastochinki here. This is where then Russia got to in the fall of Avdiivka, and are now pushing far through Subjerny here and up to other areas. And if you look back on a map of mine from just the other day, we said was, well, Russia will look to close off this gap. They'll continue this push out to line it up because they are wanting to envelope bits and pieces. And I think this just shows us that these areas were not reinforced enough. And there was time to do it. I'm sorry, there was time to do it. This held for 2 years, 10 years, depending of where you want to bloody talk. And what Russia has successfully done, credit where credit's due, is now they've created this buffer zone out from Avdiivka, which is what they wanted to do. So let's go out to this point. We're talking 6Ks, 4Ks. They've created now that buffer zone. And if they reinforce in here, it's going to be incredibly difficult to take back in there. Like it or not, love me or hate me to say this, Russia is fighting better on the front line now than they did in the beginning of the war, and are actually increasing, I believe, the capability as well, which is a big problem as Ukraine is having more and more problems with supply and with support, both publicly and from governments. So let's look, and we won't read through all these, but let's look at Suryak when he was breaking down this movement. And this shows basically just the same as what we saw on the Deep State map. So on day 729, so back on that 23rd, during the last hours, Russian army increased offensive operations in this area from the coke plant up here and out of Avdiivka. Coming up out of that, then forest belt. This was then the next map that we saw. So let's move this one. So this is 729. This is then 2 days later. Russian army took control over this Lastochinki area here. And with the capture of the village, the situation of the Ukrainian army in Subjerny has become more complicated. The troops have practically withdrawn from the locality. So We see this map then turn into this map, and then we see later in the day, then this map here close up just some positions around here as well. That Russian army took more control over the village of Stepove. Moreover, Russian army retreated from here, combining the locality, so pushing on it all in, squeezing down on this. The situation is more complex in Zvezda due to the proximity of Thankyou, where Ukrainian troops are entrenched. They're attacking Russian troops that are slowly advancing inside the locality. So they are then having attacks out from here as well, from Ukraine. We're not sure how built up these areas are, because this area went now directly on the front line to a lot of time was 7-8 Ks from the front line, and within a week is now 100% down on the front line. I can hear people now going, this is not strategically important. Sorry, but it is. This is footage of Russian soldiers inside that Lashchinki area here, raising then a flag there. We've seen a lot of flag raising over the past couple of days, and this has been the last Avdiivka update from Syriac. Situation west of Avdiivka, Russian army secured the locality of Zvezda, so we see the ones before it saying they're moving up. It's getting more difficult, and have got it. This is replicated then off the deep state map here as well. The Ukrainian army have retreated to where we spoke about they're having counterattacks from, where Russian forces are approaching. Moreover, Russian forces have secured the northern and southern flanks of Lashchinki here too. So they've got then the flanks here, and this is what we have seen before, but on a small scale of closing up in here. So this will be pulled out at some point. It's already grey zone. We're already getting told that troops are moving backwards, and will close up areas there, gaining more and more territory. So that whole Avdiivka front, it was a bit of a domino effect that has then happened there, and creating that buffer for Russia. That is what they wanted. Now, I do want to look, before we go, I was actually meant to do this at the start, but it'll still be relevant, at over a year difference on the front line. So we look at, on the right, you'll see that this is the 2023 on the 24th, and then 2024. So these maps are a year apart. We can just look at what difference these actually have taken. So realistically, on the grand scheme, Russia has not increased its control by that much. We're talking 80 square kilometers up in Kharkiv area, a little bit actually less up in Kharkiv as well in some different areas, and down in the south have made a few hundred. So not too dramatically different over a year. That said, net gain was still in Russia's favor after we saw the big counteroffensive from last year we talked about in the beginning with Zelensky. But a year separate these two images. At that time, the Russian army was in a defensive position after the defeats in Kherson and Kharkiv in the autumn of 22. That big push, and it's the largest push we've actually seen Ukraine of recovering ground. As the mobilized Russians arrived at the front, new lines of defense were being erected along the kilometer-long front line in anticipation of the new Russian offensive in the south. While the few advances were being made in Bakhmut by Wagner PMC, now the situation has turned around and the Russian army has gone on the offensive. So right now, recapturing several areas lost during the summer of 23 and new ones on the eastern front, such as the bastion of Avdiivka, so not recovered, new territory. As can be seen from the data, these territorial gains have not reversed the net balance of a year ago, a difference of 434 square kilometres. This is a war of attrition. The seizure of a few square kilometres at the cost of enormous expenditure of material and human resources. And that is unbelievably true. We saw probably a year, 18 months ago, we saw it coming that this war is going to be a war of attrition and a grind down of who can last the longest. And that ties in with the casualties that we saw in the beginning of the video and where you want to believe that. And even if you do believe that numbers, is that differential enough to sustain for either side the losses? If you're talking 7, 8 to 1, how does that actually work long term? Interesting, but I'll let you guys speculate on that yourselves. Now we're just going to move up to the north, up into then Bakhmut, where we're actually seeing a similar thing of what we're seeing in Avdiivka, of Russia expanding then their control. Now, not to the same degree, but what we do know, Russia won Ivanovsky. Not really Ivanovsky itself, the high ground that sits just out of Ivanovsky, and of course then gives them advantage to then get into Chasiv Yar as there are rolling hills that sit basically parallel with Bakhmut in here. Now, let's have a look then on Surak, and this is just so we can look on the Google Earth. So this is Kromove, Ivanovsky. So we're looking basically down this way. Anyway, you can see these hills here, and that Russia is gaining on the backside of these. Now, if we zoom up, give you a better idea, here's Chasiv Yar. These, where my pointer is, these are the hills we're talking about. Backside of these hills, very important for artillery and mortars. These can now sit in around here, in defilade positions. So you have a much better fire control going out than coming in. And then once you get this high ground here, the drop down into Chasiv Yar becomes easier. So this bowl in here between Ivanovsky, Kromove was very important, and recovering some ground and areas in here. Now, this is backed up as well then on the Surak map. And let's just step through these. So 22, 23, move to Ivanovsky, and then expansion of control in that same bowl that I'll call it there. So this was the day 729. Put this on the right. After 48 hours of clashes, Russian army consolidated the control of the first houses of Ivanovsky, so this entrance, after the capture of the trenches of the eastern outskirts. Then the next day, you can see these maps, this closed up down in here. Now, this is slightly different to Deep State. It's showing more on Surak than Deep State, but that's fairly normal. That, as combat continues in the eastern part of Ivanovsky, Russian army took control over the forest belt south of it and north of Klishkivka. And we do see this map just move a little bit on the grey zone, just tiny bit here, but speaking that the forest belt out of Klishkivka, and it's sort of saying it's more closed down in here. Maybe we'll see the map update in the next couple of days, but this is in a very important area as well. You can't just pay off everything as saying that nothing is tactically or strategically important. Now, up to the north, I haven't seen any changes on these maps. We come down this Mariinka, Novomaylivka front. Let's just talk first about Krasnoyarivka. So, of course, this purple, these borders here, this is held for 10 years. So we presume that in and around here is heavily, heavily fortified. But there is talk that Russia is going to launch into Krasnoyarivka here and have made some ground down in here, not being shown, though, on the Deep State map. So this is what then Surak is saying. So just down to the south, I might have said north, just down to the south, that Russia has made some ground. You can line up where these roads are, so making ground up there apparently. Following a huge bombardment during the last 2 days, Russian army began operations to capture the town of Krasnoyarivka. This is fairly major considering the towns that are actually in here. After the capture of Mariinka, only this border town remains to be taken on that part of the Eastern Front. Russian troops began to advance into the plantations near here, near the mine, and in the direction of the lakes to the northwest, where some territorial gains were made as Ukrainian army retreated northwards. Fighting is currently being heard in the vicinity of the first street houses of Krasnoyarivka. However, the Russians have not yet entered. So they haven't entered yet, and like we said, the break-in into an area like this, that is the most costly part and the most difficult part, is just to create that first step break-in. But you look at where then this is sitting here, out of here and out of here, it is logical that this will be then the next step out into the Donbass further. Now, just south of there, Novomaylivka, Polbita area, we have then Solidoki here, and we do see then on this map that Ukraine has made some ground. Russia has lost some ground in here. I should say more, this Deep State is showing that Russia lost it, because it would be blue if Ukraine gained territory, so that's on the Ukrainian map itself. So right here, Surak is showing that Ukraine has made ground. Southwest of Donetsk, Ukrainian army launched counterattack and recaptured the positions previously taken by Russian army last week on Solidoki here. So basically the exact same position we just spoke about. Now, Novomaylivka here, we know that Russia has got into the first streets here as well, and there is apparently attacks being launched from the north to support the southern axis, but we're not seeing any change on the Deep State. But we then have a look on Surak, and it is saying that they're advancing down into the west. Russian army took control of the rest of the hangars south of Novomaylivka and part of this street. So moving down this street where my cursor is now, but the Deep State is not showing that. So like everything, we want sort of two-factor authentication on this channel, not just one bloke, well, I'm the bloke talking shit, but we want the maps to actually line up. So let's have a look down in Robotny. Now, the deep state map isn't really showing any change at all, maybe just an expansion of grey zone here, but no change considering what all the other pages I've seen are saying is some major shifts in here and successful counterattacks also. So we're going to start on day 731, where we do see that Russia did make a hell of a lot of ground entering into Robotny out of Novopokrovka here and made a lot of ground. If we look where the kink in this road is and it heads up, this is said kink just here. That apparently it was looking like this. But again, we want the maps to line up. But let's go over it anyway. That Zap front, Russian army broke Ukrainian army defenses in Robotny, taking control over 40% of the locality, which a kink in the road would be 40%. In addition, troops are advancing from the east, forcing Ukrainian army salient to withdraw from the salient. In addition to withdrawal, is taking place in the last area of Surovikin line out of Russian control. It's expected that the front line will be leveled in the next hours. Now, this didn't happen. Hold on. But we do see just here, that is in this same area here, where we did see an expansion of grey zone. So we're going to say that there was something happen there. But we see this arrow here, which lines up with, this is the Surovikin line. Of course, these all lined up through here. Say, like that. I know that's bastardized, but yep, like that. That this is what Russia will want. They will want back the Surovikin line because they know that it worked. But saying that they held a lot of control in there for the day. Then, the next day, 7:32, that situation's up front. After some hours of combat, the Russian army failed to consolidate the position, so overextended inside Robotny and retreated to the southern trenches, pulled out, which were completely taken. Ukrainian army recovered some position, but the locality is partially under the grey area. It's expected new Russian attack will take place in the next hours. So let's have a look. This is how it was the day before and then the next day. So this area held to a degree up just on the east, but Robotny region here that Ukraine had then a successful counter attack push and push the Russians back out. You need to remember that the front line in many areas is very fluid, that it moves forward and backwards. Now, that for the maps, that is all that we can go over. 27 minutes. Sorry, we're getting a bit long in the tooth, but we do have some interesting bits and pieces to look over. So Russia did lose a very important aircraft, the second time this year, being a modernized A-50. Of course, this is an AWACS aircraft. This is controlling in the airspace, controlling all different sort of elements, but mainly then for your targeting of fighter aircraft and I've had a mental blank. Your intelligence surveillance in the air as well. Now, people are saying this is Patriot. Some are saying it's not. We're not sure. But we know that it was hit, apparently, over the Sea of Azov and then crashed into Russia. So we have actually some footage of this. So we do see that it's saying it's being chased by missiles as this is then popping flares or chaff. I know there's a difference. I can't tell the difference of looking at them. You can tell me. Okay, we're just going to skip forward a little bit. So then there is impact. And then we do see further impact, plane breaking up, and the plane then coming down and impacts ground. We got footage of it in the ground too. Now, then it's been done by a fighter bomber, has confirmed it. This is what we like, double confirmation, when there's a hell of a lot of claims around fighter aircraft. A-50 is lost. It's currently unknown who shot it down. We know the last one that fighter bombers said was the Russians. All assumptions go to the garden, but 256 kilometers from the front line. I'm presuming I don't know what the LBS is. I even had to Google and couldn't work it out. But from this video, it is clear that the crew had information that a missile was flying at them. Flares, chaff. They knew it. They did what they could, what they should, but eternal flight. So it has gone down there. We've seen many claims saying, has Ukraine used a Western weapon to hit a Russian plane inside of Russia? Now, that's claims, people saying, because, of course, Ukraine, by the West standard, is not meant to use weapons inside Russia. It's a bit unfair, but that's just what it is. So there's claims there, but Ukraine's saying it was over the Sea of Azov and turned down into Russia itself. But either way, very important aircraft that has gone down. Now, it can be difficult to get a number of how many of these aircraft Russia actually has because of the modernization programs to these A-50s, but a lot of claims have said there was 9 modernized, and now that Russia is down to 7, with the last 2 being lost only within a few weeks of each other. Again, modernizations, what's happening with aircraft, it's hard to know, but incredibly important plane for Russia, and will become more important once Ukraine then has the F-16s inside. This is why we're seeing a lot of this getting targeted. Now, with this as well, it steps right into what I said in the beginning about that Ukraine is putting the Patriots, is having more confidence in them, but also more risk with the Patriots, putting them closer and closer then to the front line. Of course, this increased the risks of these being hit, and I'd say right now, the Russian aviation, this is the main thing that they want to hit, with the Su-34s, 35s, and A-50s getting hit by those systems over this area that they're hunting them. They would have to be. But, of course, that increases the lethality of the system on the front line, but also risk in other areas where Russia may target because there's not Patriot. It's a huge toss-up. But speaking of modernization of aircraft, I got something, or I thought I was right, and then I was like, I was under the understanding in my last video that Tu-160s hadn't been built from the 80s, and I even put an annex in saying I didn't think these got built since the 80s. Now, I was correct, although I said they'd been built, that annex was correct, that the Tu-160Ms that I showed in the video and we talked about, these are deeply modernized bombers. So taking them out of service, modernizing them, whatever that means, glass cockpits, whatever, and putting them back then into service, new engines, whatever. Of course, look at an F-16. F-16's 40-plus-year-old plane. It's not the same plane it started with. This happens in other air forces as well, but they haven't been building new ones. So wherever the correction lays on that, I do apologize. Now, we need to look at some footage. We have the first combat, footage of an Abrams tank here, of course, gifted from the US to Ukraine with some music so we can't hear the beautiful turbine engine of an Abrams and it guzzling bloody 50 litres a minute. But we can see it shooting here and landing. Now, one thing I will say in this, it is seeming to be used, at least in my eye, as more of a self-propelled gun. We're not really sure. It's sort of out there on its own, which is, I guess, concerning, not working with infantry. A tank working without infantry and without air is a sitting duck. This is the problem with Russia had right at the beginning. Apparently they told the tankers that they had air superiority and didn't, and the tankers then didn't have infantry. But we have been told really that a lot of these modern tanks are being used more as artillery systems rather than main battle tanks. And that's probably why we haven't seen, any of these lost, because in combat, you actually have losses, as well as we haven't really seen these, fighting anything else in areas. But first time we're seeing the Abrams actually firing then its main gun. We haven't seen anything really of the Challengers for a while, or the Leopards either. Now, the next bit I want to speak on is this American in Avdiivka.
We're here to plant the U.S. flag as a sign of friendship and support for all the things that people are enduring here. And it's a small token of a small task that we can do to show our support. We have to end this. You look around Avdiivka and you see what's happening. You see the destroyed buildings. You see these are people's homes. We need to support Russia. We have to have friendship.
So saying that we need to support Russia. And look, there's a heap of fighters all over the world in a lot of different wars that have gone. Now, of course, we've seen a heap of Americans go and fight for Ukraine. And we have seen at least one, but there's going to be more than one, fighting for Russia as well. I do actually know that there are Westerners fighting in Wagner, PMC as well. And people are going, how could you do this? Well, when you get 300 million people in a country, you're probably going to get some people that lean other ways. And this guy has gone over. But your chances of actually coming home and whatever, well, mate, the amount that people can actually, like intelligence service can actually find out about people from things like this, very easy. But as Americans living in Russia, citizens, I'm not surprised to see it. I'm actually surprised it's taken, say, this long. Some people said, what is the patch on his helmet? There's actually a throwback. It's not of course, not the original, but it's actually a throwback to like Blackbeard's patch, Blackbeard's flag on his pirate ship. Very commonly worn by SEAL 2nd SEAL Team 2, I believe. I could be wrong. But a heap of soldiers. But I've got one on this wall up there. It's like an Australian version of one. So that's just that.
Have to make sure that all the goals laid out are fulfilled, and we just have to stop this, and we have to do everything we can to help. And you know, there's Old Glory, the U.S. flag, and I hope that people back home see it. I hope people understand and look at independent facts. Right, do your own research, do your own homework, find out what's really going on here. We have to support these people. We have to help them. We have to stop this. I feel proud. I feel proud to be here. I've met amazing people. I'm standing with amazing people that have done a lot for this and to help people, and that's what it's about. You know, that's why I'm here. That's what I want to do. And these guys that I'm here with, I mean, these guys are incredible people. My hat's off to them. What they do on a daily basis is just unbelievable. It's incredible. And to people back home that are in the military and that have been to war, I'm a veteran from Afghanistan. The people that have been through this, they understand it. And we haven't seen anything like this, even in Afghanistan. This is something, I mean, the entire city is rubble. This is unbelievable. And in Afghanistan, I was in the Air Force for 10 years. In Afghanistan, I've never seen
anything like this. American veteran then over fighting for Russia. And I'm sure that he's probably not alone in that. And I think it's interesting to have a look at it. And I'm not surprised. I think a lot of people ask me my comment on this. I'm like, well, people have different views to people. I'm not surprised at all by this. And plenty went to fight for Ukraine. People go and fight for Russia. Of course, not the same amount, but we know there's information coming through channels that there's a heap of Westerners that go and go and train cartels in like drug cartels. They go and train them because the money is fantastic. People get pulled around. You know, we saw Wagner PMC put out ads trying to recruit Americans to fight, and at least one bloke has ticked the box and said yes. Now, we're going to talk about Crimea a little bit. Now, surprisingly, we haven't actually seen the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Strait Bridge down here, targeted more. We've seen a missile go into it that hit a car and sadly orphaned a kid. And Kirill Budanov has put out another warning just today in a video. Can't find it translated anywhere, but from good sources saying that he said, in 2024, new surprises await the enemies in Crimea. I do not recommend the civilian population to use the Crimean Bridge. And we've seen Ukraine have more and more success with their seaborne drones against ships. Taking a bridge is more difficult, and it is far easier to repair a bridge, but we may see a combined attack with long-range missiles and those drones to try and target this bridge. We know that if Ukraine is really, really serious about attack in the south, this needs to come down. If you're actually going to attack into one of these two areas that you're not allowed to target in here with systems, because this is Russia through here. Well, shit. That bridge down in here is going to have to come down at some point, including then the train line. And I think that there's been actually a bit of a confirmation to this threat of the Crimean Bridge, as we're getting a lot of reports out of Russian channels that Russia is moving a heap of equipment across the railway now, right there, as tanks. So we see this of T-62s on the rail that have moved into Crimea recently, so more tanks moved in there. And then apparently this is rail crossing just into Crimea as well, of more fighting vehicles aboard trains moving into Crimea. So where my reading into this, and I know correlation doesn't mean causation, of course, but I think that Budanov threatening this bridge, that Russia's gone, yep, well, if it does threaten, let's move a heap of shit in right now. We got word even last year before the Ukrainian counteroffensive that Russia was focused on filling up its water and food stores inside of Crimea, because it could be isolated fairly quickly. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is that Ukrainian officials have accused Polish protesters of destroying 160 tons of Ukrainian grain at a Polish railway station. We have some drone footage. Get rid of the music here. We have footage of this, of course. It's been poured out of these box cars, I think that's what you'd call it, and has destroyed the grain. Now, what we're seeing here, I wouldn't say it's 160 tons in my infinite grain expert wisdom, but of course, it could be a total of that across many, many areas as well that we have seen. But we know that there is more and more friction right on that border with economic, agricultural sector of Poland and Ukraine. And that's not going to go away with just shaking hands of two presidents across the border. That's not going to go away. That the Polish farmers, if they've had a 50% decrease in selling their grain, that is going to then hang around. And we've spoken about the reasons of this. Poland being part of the EU has to reach for certain climate targets, has to have a certain amount of fallow land, all of this stuff. Ukraine doesn't reach those. Of course, Ukraine doesn't have tariffs now from the Europe onto its grain. It can't go out through the Black Sea on the same amount. So its grain's way, way cheaper, and it's being moved into Poland and sold and undercutting the market there. The farmers are not happy about it. And we could see more and more of a rift in Ukraine, as we have seen the farmers blockade more, or even at some point saying all of the crossings into Ukraine. Now, one thing the Polish government has done is it has reclassified these border crossings as critical infrastructure. So, it's one thing blocking my road out here, say, if I just go set up a sign, that's one thing. But if I go blockade something that's critical, whether it's water or an ambulance station or police, I don't know, something like that, it's critical, you can charge people with much higher laws. So it has been reclassified as critical infrastructure, so the blocking of that is more serious on the farmers. But again, it's probably not going to stop them if their way of life is being inhibited. People say, the selfishness, humans are intrinsically selfish creatures and people want to look after their own investments. And fair enough. I'm not saying I agree with the farmers here, but farmers are protesting all across Europe against laws that the EU is putting in, and Ukraine will need to play ball. Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Romania, they all have agricultural industry that is a direct competitor to Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine used to have everything come out of Odessa and, out of the south, I should add, and out through the Black Sea, supplying other countries. Now, all of it is coming out into these areas and undercutting. It's not moving further on. So it's going to be a big, big problem in Ukraine as there's more and more hesitation from the West to send in money, I should say from America, to send in aid. Ukraine needs to build its own economic systems to build its own equipment for a prolonged war. This is all part of the butterfly effect that could have long-term consequences. And I think this is very serious and needs to be tried to be fixed right now. Both sides need to play ball. It's not the officials from one just pointing fingers. It needs to actually be solved. Legends, I know this one was long. Look after yourselves. Thanks for the support on my interviews and stuff recently. One of them really didn't get any traction, but I thought it was some of the best work I've done, but that's just how YouTube works. But if you want to support me, watch one of those. Look after yourselves. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.